Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second event in the Voices of Our Time series for this academic year. This series is designed to bring leading thinkers to our campus to discuss important national and international issues. Wake Forest believes that providing this kind of notable speakers is excellent for our students as we try to get them to face the pressing issues of our day. Today we are pleased to have Jay Bilas with us to lead a thoughtful discussion on college athletics. Jay is a basketball analyst for ESPN and CBS Sports, as well as an attorney with Moore & Van Allen in Charlotte. He was a four-year starter on Duke University's basketball team from 1983 to 1986 and helped lead Duke to the Final Four, a national championship game in 1986, after which he was selected by the Dallas Mavericks in the 1986 NBA draft. Jay returned to Duke as an assistant basketball coach from 1990 to 1992, where he also attended law school and earned a law degree in 1992. Jay is part of the Wake Forest family through his wife, Wendy, whom we are happy to welcome to Wake Forest today. She holds an MBA from Wake Forest, and Wendy is an artist, and in 2007 she won a special award, the North Carolina Art with a Heart Emerging Artist. Proceeds from her art sales help benefit a charity that assists after-school and summer programs for underserved students in Charlotte. We're delighted to have you with us, Wendy. We live in a sports-infused culture. For young people today, ESPN is much a coin of the realm as any other single source of information. And at a university like Wake Forest, which was a founding member of the Atlantic Coast Conference, intercollegiate athletics is a central facet of our identity. College sports today is wonderful and inspiring. It can also be problematic and sometimes troubling. So often we are whipsawed between moments of greatness and inspiration and moments when we are frankly embarrassed. Jay Bilas is an astute observer and commentator on this changing and dynamic world. I know of no one better to speak on the subject, college sports inside out. Jay, thank you for being here today.
Well, first of all, thank you, President Hatch. Thank you for having me. It's an honor for me to be here. A little bit intimidating, frankly. When I told my wife that I was speaking at this and being a Wake Forest Business School alum, when she got the flyer via email and she saw Voices of Our Time, the great thinkers and all that, she was not impressed. She thought that somebody snapped their cap here at Wake Forest and had lost all perspective on things. And I also, when I accepted this invitation, I said to her, Wendy, did you ever in your wildest dreams think that I would be speaking at Wake Forest in the Voices of Our Time lecture series? And she turned to me and said, Jay, you're never in my wildest dreams. So I'm starting out at a deficit, and I'm trying to make up for it. For better or for worse, I'm a product of college athletics. I love college sports. I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents never went to college. My father was a commercial fisherman before I was born, and he was in the television repair business. He had his own TV store. So he sold TVs and he repaired them. And that's how he made his living. And college, for me, was, when I was young, not necessarily an expectation. It became an expectation when I became pretty good at basketball. And I'm not sure that if I didn't play, what my academic career would have been like. Maybe I would have been a better student, I don't know. But all I know is I wanted to play. And for me, college athletics was about the pursuit of excellence. And I think it still is. And I agree with President Hatch. It provides us with so many inspirational stories. I think it's a great thing. I do think that a lot of the embarrassment or the contradictions we've seen can be overblown in a lot of ways. And I'll give you some examples of that tonight. And I wanted to frame the discussion, though, by telling you, I hear the word hypocrisy a lot with regard to college athletics. And I think that's wrong. I don't think that's the right way to frame things. I don't think we have hypocrites in college athletics. I don't think the NCAA is hypocritical. I think there are some contradictions in the system and with the way things work. And I think a lot of those contradictions can be removed if we looked at the underpinnings of college athletics and re-examined it in an honest fashion. The NCAA started in 1905, and it started as a response to deaths in football. There were, back in the days of the flying wedge, young athletes were dying in football. And President Theodore Roosevelt told the presidents of the different universities that are playing football, either you fix this or I will. And that was how the NCAA started. And back then, you heard as much complaining, if not more, about the system and about college athletics and about the role of sports in a university community than you do now. The NCAA was always about reform. It was always about the control of costs. And that was back when, at the turn of the century, in 1905, when it started, when colleges were for educating gentlemen. They were not only elite, they were elitist. And really the first competition in athletics was in rowing among Ivy League schools. Harvard and Yale, they started rowing. And from the very beginning, it was sponsored and paid for by a company. So the very first athletic contest between Harvard and Yale was illegal. and there were no amateurs in it by today's standards. Right now, there's something called the principle of amateurism, or the amateur ideal, which is called the bedrock principle of the NCAA. And I want to talk about three areas tonight. I want to speak very briefly and then get everybody else involved, because this is less about me telling you what I think, and I think more about engaging in discussion and learning from each other about what we think about college athletics, what's its role in a university community, and who decides. And I wrote a couple things down, some issues that I think that would be good to discuss. One is, what's the role of the NCAA? It's a pretty fundamental question, but what's its role? And then, what is the principle of amateurism? Where does it fit in college athletics? And does it even exist, and did it ever? And the third is the commercialism in the game, and in college athletics in general. And if we start off with the role of the NCAA, I was going to bring one with me, but I couldn't really lift it, and I didn't want to carry it across campus. I was going to bring a rule book. The NCAA rule book is about that thick. All right, it is full of more rules than you could count. There is no way. I'm an attorney. I deal with rules. I deal with statutes. I deal with laws all day long. I cannot make sense out of the NCAA rule book. And I'll give you an example of how this works and how difficult the rule book is to deal with. If you have an interpretation issue of an NCAA rule, and you're a basketball coach, and you ask your staff in a meeting, can we do this? The answer is going to be, I don't know. Right? You're going to have a compliance department you ask, and they're going to say, well, I don't know. We'll have to, you call the NCAA. And a lot of times they don't know. Right. One of my friends in coaching says what he does with his staff is he has 3 different staff members call the NCAA and ask the question. And he gets 3 different answers every time. And they pick the one they like best and go with that one. Now, it's funny, but it's true. And I was talking with Ron Wellman before, and I was going to write about this, but I don't like mocking the system and mocking the rules, because there are some rules that are necessary and the rules that are good, but there are a bunch of rules that are just stupid. And right now, there's a rule in the rule book. You can provide, for your team, you can provide fruits, nuts, and bagels in the locker room, but you cannot give cream cheese or peanut butter. Fruits, nuts, and bagels, no peanut butter. I tend to think that colleges and universities can decide whether they want to have peanut butter in their locker room or not. I don't think that's an issue the NCAA needs to get into. All right, this rule has changed, but it used to be my favorite one. When I was an assistant basketball coach at Duke, you could not buy a recruit who's coming to visit your campus on an official visit a first-class airline ticket, but you could charter him a plane. And that's what schools did. They chartered an airplane and brought the kid in on a chartered flight. but you couldn't buy a first-class ticket. Right? Those things don't make any sense. And there are a lot of rules like that. And what I think about the rule book, it is complicated and too complicated. It is mostly unnecessary, and it is unenforceable. And you have a system of enforcement in the NCAA where the NCAA is the judge, it's the investigator, the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Right? That's not a fair system. And any school that goes before the NCAA in an enforcement matter basically throws themselves on the altar of forgiveness and hopes that the NCAA doesn't kill them and doesn't slam them. And you make the best case that you can, and you hope for the best, and they give you the opportunity to punish yourself first, you know, the self-imposed sanctions, and then they hit you afterwards. And, you know, we just saw what happened in the USC matter. We're going to see what happens with regard to University of North Carolina, some of these other places that are dealing with these issues now with regard to agents and some other issues. It's a very difficult process to go through. I tend to think it's unfair. And I think fairness should be the first issue that the NCAA deals with. That doesn't mean the NCAA is wrong in all these cases. They're not. It doesn't mean that. But the enforcement process, the investigation process, it's flawed, and it could be much better, and it could be much easier to go through. But let's talk about eligibility first, because within the rule book, there are a few things: eligibility, compliance, and a level playing field. All right, now the rule book is big because the NCAA wants a level playing field. All right, I think all of us can agree that doesn't exist, and it never will. There's 347 institutions in Division I, 347. And the NCAA rule book is a one-size-fits-all rule book. And what you've got, what that is, the NCAA really, all these institutions, it's like a coral reef. It's an organic, being that is reactive. It reacts to stimulus. So every time there's a problem or a perceived problem, they pass a rule to try to remedy that problem. And every time there's a rule passed, there are unintended consequences to that rule. And right now we're dealing with agents, and one of the reasons we're dealing with agents, not the only reason, it's not the NCAA's fault, but one of the reasons that agents and the basketball subculture during the summer is so powerful is because our coaches aren't allowed to talk to recruits anymore. You know, right now, Jeff Bezdelic, I don't know if he's here now, but Jeff is the head basketball coach here. When he's recruiting a kid, he can call the kid, depending on his age, 1 time a week. And then later on, it's 2 times a week. All right, everybody else in the free world gets to call that kid as much as they want, except for basketball coaches. Now, the rule book implies that basketball coaches are a bad influence on kids. They're not. They're a good influence on kids. And they should be allowed to have contact with those kids as much as they want and as much as the kid wants. Because what happens is the kid is allowed to call the coach as much as he or she wants, but the coach can only call once a week or twice a week, depending upon the age of the kid. So what that does, it's created powerful people that the NCAA can't regulate. Agents runners, AAU coaches, summer basketball coaches, recruiting analysts. So now if a coach wants to know what a kid is thinking, he doesn't call the kid anymore except for 1 time a week. He calls the person next to the kid and say, have the kid call me. Or what did the kid tell you? What's the kid thinking? You know, trying to find out what's going on in recruiting. And it's created so many unintended consequences. It's just wrong. It's not necessary. These kids are more savvy than you think. They can protect themselves. They can say, don't call me anymore. And the coaches aren't going to bombard them. They're not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize their access to a kid. They're not bad influences. They're good influences. And what happens is you take away that influence, you take away that access, and you're going to have more mistakes made. Coaches aren't going to get to know a kid as well as they once did. The kid isn't going to get to know the coach and the coaching staff as well as they once did. Everything's been moved up now, so decisions are made earlier than they used to be. When I came out, I decided early where I was going to go to college. December of my senior year in high school. That was early back then. You know, the signing period was April then. And I decided in December, and that was really early because I was ready for it to be over. Now they decide when they're juniors. Sometimes kids are committing when they're a freshman in high school. You know, you've had some instances where a kid was offered a scholarship as an 8th grader. Well, that's okay too. I mean, when people say, that's ridiculous, it's inappropriate. You know, the coaches didn't come up to an elementary school with a van and, you know, hold candy out and ask the kid to get in. They offered him a scholarship to college. How horrible is that? It's not that big of a deal. People say, that's inappropriate. How could they possibly do that? It's not that big of a deal. We're over-regulating our coaches. And the other thing we're doing, too, with our coaches, they don't talk to the parents as much as they used to. When I was being recruited, the coaches called and talked to my parents. Now you only get one phone call a week. If you talk to a parent, the same as talking to the kid. They don't talk to the parents anymore. So now you're not going to waste your one phone call with the kid by talking to the mother or the father or the guardian. So it's made the process far more difficult for coaches, and frankly, it's just not right. And you've got, with this one-size-fits-all system, you have got eligibility issues. I recently wrote an article about Kentucky, and they had a young man named Eric Bledsoe, who was from the state of Alabama. And Eric Bledsoe, I know the kid, he's a good kid. All right, he had a 2.5 GPA in his core courses coming out of high school. That made him initially eligible to play by NCAA standards. Played his whole freshman year, was eligible to play by Kentucky standards, was duly admitted, and at the end of the year, after the season was over, after having played against Stanford and Wake Forest and some other really good schools, somebody raised an issue about a grade that he got in high school, an algebra grade, that had been changed from a C to an A because of some extra work that he turned in. Right. I don't think the NCAA should be in the eligibility business. I think that Wake Forest and Kentucky and Harvard and UNLV and Northern Iowa are all perfectly capable of determining who gets in, who they're going to educate, how they're going to do it, who gets a uniform, and who gets to play. And the NCAA has an initial eligibility standard because they've been criticized over the years that it's a sham. Well, I don't think that's true. And if it is, it's a problem with an individual institution that a 2.5 grade point average is not going to cure. You know, I think that they should get out, because what happened with Eric Bledsoe was he was admitted to school. The NCAA has a clearinghouse that they spend millions of dollars a year on, and the clearinghouse cleared him. Clearinghouse went over his transcript and cleared him. And when the issue was brought up, they investigated and looked at it, and because the Alabama State High School Association chose not to do anything about that grade, even though they stated that they felt that the story they were told was not credible, the NCAA just relied on Alabama. Well, what good is it then? I mean, if we're going to have a standard where, you know, what is the standard and why is it 2.5? Why can't, if it's 2.4 and the kid played the whole year, the republic still stands and the earth didn't spin off its axis. Everything was fine. And it's okay. You know, those schools are capable of making their own decisions. Reasonable people can disagree with that, and I certainly respect that. I just happen to think that there's too much money wasted on eligibility when Wake Forest, Duke, whatever, can make their own decisions with regard to who plays, who doesn't, and when. And I'll give you an example of how the contradiction I see in that. The NCAA says what initial eligibility is. All right, if there is a player at a school that has been convicted of a crime, NCAA has no say over that. The school gets to decide whether that player plays. Accused of a crime, pending, school decides. NCAA has no say in that. Does that strike anybody as being kind of weird? That a convicted felon can play, but not a kid with 2.4? That doesn't make any sense to me, and I think with 347 Division I institutions, a one-size-fits-all standard does not work, cannot work. And with this huge rule book, what we've got now is a compliance system that is downright crazy. Now, I don't know how many people work in compliance here at Wake Forest, but from the research I've done on it, schools spend in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $500,000 a year on compliance. They have staffs anywhere from 5 to 10 people that are salaried, benefits, all that stuff. I don't know how many, Ron, you've got in your office here. How many compliance people do you have? 3. Okay, so 3 compliance people. And that's probably the low end. There would probably not be less than 3 for a BCS school. That's a lot of money to spend on the rule book and interpreting the rule book. Now, because of the phone call rule we've talked about, you know, a good friend of mine, Kelvin Sampson, is made out recently to be Al Capone because he had too many phone calls. And it's reported as he had 500 extra phone calls. Well, it was a 5-year, they went back 5 years. The 500 phone calls were for his whole staff. It came out to 1 extra phone call a week. And they made him look like Al Capone. Now, I'm not saying that rules should ever be violated. They shouldn't be. But phone calls, We're going to draw the line at phone calls. So what was the response to that? All right, almost every school now has compliance software where they used to go over phone bills. They would have somebody go over every phone bill, match up every phone call. Match up phone calls with a phone bill for recruiting? And now they've got compliance software. The best one that I know of is called Comply and Verify ACS. What it costs about between $6,000 and $10,000 a year to monitor phone calls. And that's just, that doesn't make any sense. You guys can determine how to recruit a kid. It's not, you're not, nobody wore me out as a player. These kids aren't getting worn out. It's not an issue, but it's being made into one. So you've got all these things you can't control that the NCAA is trying to regulate, and I think they over-regulate. Phone calls, meals. Let me give you another example. A football player from West Point, after 2 years at West Point, transferred to an ACC school. So the player transferred in good standing from West Point, academically, and had to sit out a year as a transfer. So essentially, when he was eligible to play at this ACC school, he was a junior academically. Before the season started, had a knee injury that cost him the year. All right, so before he could play again, he had accumulated enough credits to graduate. As he was about to be declared eligible to play, or as he was about to get off his knee injury and play, the NCAA said, wait a minute now, if he's accumulated enough credits to graduate, he's no longer making satisfactory progress toward a degree. He's not eligible. So the school had to have the kid declare a second major so that he could play ball. And as soon as his season was over, he petitioned for another year. As soon as the season was over, he graduated and left school, never completing the second major. Was that worthwhile? Was that something that they should have been made to do? Now schools, because football players essentially never leave campus anymore, they go to summer school, and they're in school almost year-round in a lot of cases. Some schools now have taken to monitoring that their students don't get too far ahead, so that they'll still be making satisfactory progress to remain eligible. They can hand out their degrees the way they see fit. I was a big fan of the late Miles Brand. I liked him very much. I was at an event with him once where it was called the U.S. Basketball Summit. Everybody involved in basketball got together, including David Stern, the NBA. We were discussing the fact that we were all breathing the same air in the game, but communication wasn't very good. And Miles had said the night before when we were talking about something, he was a little bit annoyed that Matt Leinart, the quarterback at USC, came back. When he came back for his extra year, he came back for another year after winning the Heisman Trophy and arguably could have been the first pick in the draft, came back to play again. But he had accumulated enough credits to graduate, so his last football season, one of the courses he was taking dance and some other course that wasn't considered to be highbrow academic course. And Miles didn't like it. And he wasn't complaining about it, but he thought, that doesn't sit well with me. And part of my thing was the kid came back to play. I mean, USC's offering the class. You offer dance at your school. If they can decide what to offer. The kid's doing it. What do people want the kid to do? He's graduated. He was taking a graduate course. Dance happened to be one of them. I just didn't understand what the problem was, and I still don't understand what the problem was. I don't understand what the problem was with the kid from West Point that transferred. There wasn't a problem. We were inventing one, and we don't need to be doing that kind of thing. Last about the level playing field. I think it's impossible to get a level playing field, and the fact that we're trying to is causing us more problems than we need. We keep talking about scandal and compliance and all these issues. If we didn't have some of these dumb rules, we wouldn't have scandals. Right now at North Carolina, they're beating themselves up. Now, the agent thing is a little bit different. We'll talk about that when we get some other folks up here. But a couple players have been accused of taking extra help on a paper. All right. Nobody condones academic misconduct. If a kid cheated, then the kid should be held responsible for it. Every school has an honor code, and every school has an undergraduate judicial board, including this one. And I promise you that at every undergraduate judicial board, there are cases of academic misconduct that there aren't all athletes. In fact, hardly any of them are. But when a student is caught cheating, they blame the student. When an athlete is caught cheating, they blame the enterprise. I don't think that's right. Whoever cheats, it's the individuals involved in it that should be blamed, not the entire enterprise. And I've always had a real problem with that. Let me talk to you a minute about amateurism and ask you, maybe I'll ask you if any of you have an answer. How does the NCAA define an amateur? Does anybody have an idea or want to say? Because I'd like to know. Anybody? I looked on the NCAA's website all week this week, and I could not find it defined. Went to the rule book, and the rule book defines what a professional is, but not really what an amateur is. I mean, it touches on it, but essentially what the rule is and what they say about amateur. And again, this is the bedrock principle of college athletics, is amateurism, the principle of amateurism and the amateur ideal, and it's nowhere defined on the NCAA's website. An amateur is, as an amateur, you cannot take any benefit, including academic benefits, academic scholarships, prior to being in college, because of your athletic reputation. Can't take any benefit until you get to college. Then you can take a scholarship. Then you can take whatever the NCAA says you can take. You can't do it before that. All right, so really what the NCAA is saying is nobody gets to corrupt you except us. We get to do it, but nobody else. And they can't corrupt you afterwards either. And it presumes that the players don't have a profit motive. And it presumes that they shouldn't want to be pros. Well, when I played, I wanted to be a pro. I was lucky enough that I played pro basketball overseas. I made money doing it. Amateurs have never existed in sports. They don't exist now. They didn't exist in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, from which the amateur ideal came, it was Greeks that won in athletic contests were paid 10 times their annual salary. They weren't amateurs either. They weren't amateurs in the early days. The first football players that played in the Ivy League were called ringers. The reason they were called ringers is because they weren't even in school. They were paid to play. And that's part of the reason the NCAA started. And when the NCAA declared amateurism at the very beginning in 1905, they said no scholarships, no recruiting, and no pay for play. Now they provide scholarships. Now they recruit like crazy. So they've kind of given up on that part of it. And I'll tell you one other thing about amateurism. The Olympics gave up on amateurism in the 1970s. Amateurism was taken out of the Olympic charter in the 1970s. The Olympics gave up on it. And what do we know that the Olympics don't know? Is it that athletes like Michael Phelps and Mia Hamm weren't the ideal? They were, just because they got paid endorsement money. I think we can do this in college athletics, and it would not be a problem if we did. It would just be a mental hurdle that we have to get over. I do not advocate paying the players. I do not advocate them being employees of the university. Right now, the NCAA institutions, the NCAA is a 501c3 corporation. They are tax exempt. They do not pay tax. If they started paying the players, then there'd be tax issues. But you can certainly increase the scholarship benefits and provide them with a stipend, provide them with some money. And you can take the cuffs off and let them take extra benefits. Why shouldn't a kid be allowed to do an endorsement deal? We'll talk about that, and I'd like to hear some answers to it. Because what would be so horrible if, when Chris Paul was in school here, if a local car company wanted him to do a commercial for them and gave him a car to drive, or gave him some money? Would that have been so horrible? I don't think it would be. Right now the NCAA is being sued by a guy named Ed O'Bannon and then a football player at Colorado. And they're being sued along with EA Sports over taking their names and likenesses and using them in those video games. The NCAA and member institutions have been using the players' names and likenesses for years with no compensation going to the player. Everybody involved in the enterprise gets paid except the player. Coach, athletic director, the referees. Everybody makes money except the players. Ad sales. We make money. I make money. Like, I stand on the sideline doing these games. I interview players. They're the only ones who don't get a nickel. And they're not allowed to take a nickel. I don't think that's right. And we can remedy that. We don't have a problem with them being essentially pros in the Olympics. They don't get paid for participating in the Olympics, but they can take money from endorsements and other things, and we don't have a problem with it. But we do somehow in college athletics, and I think it's kind of almost prudish that we oh my God, you know, he can't take any money, when the truth is they take compensation before they get there. Sometimes they take compensation when they're there, and they should, and it's okay that they have a profit motive. There's nothing wrong with that. But we think it's wrong. And I think we need to get over that. And then once we do, we will not have these issues of corruption. We will not have these same sort of issues of scandal. It'll be a more honest approach to what we're doing. And I would love it if if we could get everybody involved in this and sort of bat these issues back and forth. Would that be okay? Let's do that. And you guys can talk a little bit. Nobody wants to listen to me talk all night.